Hello again. A good idea, a good ideal never dies. In the ancient deserts of Judea, there was a radical Jewish sect known as the Essenes. They were heretics. They differed completely from the traditional Jewish Sadducees and Pharisees in that mainly they respected women, had women as equals, which was highly unusual in the world at that time, east or west. Women were very much second class amongst the Orthodox Jews, which we're talking about. But the Essenes were heretics in many ways. They preached equality, and that was total equality, and which meant that they didn't have slaves. And not only that, they took to the degree that they wouldn't even have servants, whereas the rest of the world, the Jews, everybody else, the Egyptians, the Romans, Greeks, doesn't matter who they were, they all had slaves. So they were radical in that respect, and they acted as they spoke. They also educated women and children. So they were completely radical. They spoke about brotherly love and loving others apart from yourselves, apart from your own group. And basically, they also sought knowledge in all forms: astrology, astronomy, science, food, health, herbs, medicines. So they were very outgoing in this respect. And of course, the main proponent that we have come to know was Yeshua, or Jesus. And he was the one who actually preached the Essene gospel of openness, brotherhood, fraternity, equality, all these aspects. Contrary to this, we had St. Paul, who created his own system. That particular belief system is called today is Christianity. And he was all for being orthodox, obeying the law, obeying the laws of the land, whatever they happen to be, even to the point of slaves. And he is recorded in the Corinthians. He just says, slaves, obey your masters. The contrast between Yeshua and St. Paul is overwhelming. With the Essenes, when the Romans invaded, and they, after the fall of the temple, many Jewish people died, sects were wiped out, which includes the Essene. We tend to think of Yeshua as probably the first Christian. But really, he was an Essene, and he promoted the ideals and beliefs of the Essenes. Quite the opposite to St. Paul. So I have a short poem that I knocked up regarding Yeshua, and I hope you enjoy that.
At Bethlehem town, not too far from the sea, at Galilee, at the beginning of the first millennium, in the year 03, it was on the 10th day of November, just being precise, which is the very first day that Yeshua opened his eyes. At Bethlehem town, not too far from the sea, at Galilee, a babe was born who later wanted to set us all free, to open up our minds to the great love in the universe. But instead of lives getting better, living just got worse. At Bethlehem town, not too far from the sea, at Galilee, wanting to grow in wisdom, he traveled afar easterly. He taught about love and joy, with minds open and free. Instead, commandments and doctrines stole our liberty. At Bethlehem town, not too far from the sea of Galilee, the baby born there at 33, he was nailed to a tree. Yeshua taught about love and liberty, with the soul soaring free. Instead, religion chained our minds and jailed our joy religiously.
But of course, Jewish people, including Essenes, and many of whom also at that time also lived in Egypt, they took a boat across to Gaul, which today we call France. And there they settled. It was multicultural. There were Greeks, there was people from all different parts of the world who'd come there. And although it was under Roman control, it was only loosely held under the Roman control, because it was a huge area and there's just a nominal Roman control and people live within the Roman law. But of course, the point is making the Essene message of liberty, fraternity, equality, those ideals and beliefs which they acted by, was brought into the south of France. And there it bubbled away for centuries, but it became ingrained into the psyche of the people in the south of France, who evolved their own beliefs, which were completely contrary to the feudal system at the time, because the feudal system was that the priest had allegiance to the bishop, and the bishop had allegiance to the cardinal, and the cardinal had allegiance to the pope. And in society, the serfs and the slaves had allegiance to their master, and then the master had allegiance to the knights, and the knights had allegiance to his lord, and his lord had allegiance to the king. And this was the feudal system. And they swore oaths of allegiance. So the Cathars said, no, we're free. We don't swear oaths to anybody. We don't belong to anybody. We just want to live amongst ourselves. We're not so much a religious movement as a spiritual movement. And they had this Essene concept of equality. Women and men had total equality, which was interesting because when the Cathars were done away with, there was no equality between men and women legally until after the Second World War. I think it was 1946, I'm not sure. But the Cathars had it at that time, and women could own land, they were educated, they were in debates, they were also part of the Cathar priesthood, so they had this total equality. So this all came and originated from the Essenes' idealistic concepts. Of course, the Cathars were the enemies of the church for lots of reasons. One was that people liked the Cathars. They didn't like paying taxes to the churches, which those cathedrals, you see, they cost a lot of money. Whereas the Cathar, they had no churches. They simply taught or preached or whatever you want to call it in houses in the forest.
Truth is within you, my brothers and sisters, if only you seek it.
And they had this total equality. And also, contrary to the mendicant monks, such as the Franciscans and the that used to go around and they begged for food, the Cathars didn't. When they took food from a peasant or whatever, they worked for that food or wrote letters or did things like that, worked in the fields. Or they might have left salt or something like that in payment of their meals. They didn't beg. They didn't make the poor poorer by begging for food of people who had very little food at that time. Pope Innocent III, he'd had enough of these pestilential Cathars, these heretic Cathars. So he preached a crusade, which we call the Albigensian Crusade against the Cathars. He's the good Pope speaking his mind.
The Cathars need to be exterminated.
So in 1209, the Northern Knights, Lords, Crusaders invaded the south of France.
Repel the attackers!
And they literally burned Cathars individually. By the score, sometimes in hundreds. At Mamon, it was up to 400. Months ago, 240. At Manu, there was 120. They didn't include about 20 or 30 children. And of course, they were burning them individually everywhere. They had battles, the Battle of Muret. But all this failed to wipe out the Cathars. They simply went underground and were protected by a lot of the lords in their chateaux in the south of France and near the Pyrenees, in that area. And ultimately, Pope Pius,
the Cathars need to be exterminated.
He introduced the Inquisition, and this was further strengthened, and torture was allowed by the following Pope, I think it was Pope Gregory. And it took 200 years, but it annihilated the Cathars. But again, this ideal of equality, brotherhood, love, which is actually, it was a social revolution that was brought on by the Cathars. People don't realise that the way we sing today was taken by the troubadours, many of them were Cathars, from the Saracens and the Moors in Spain. We took our writing from them, we took medicine from them, we took science from them, because at that time the Saracens, the Arabs, were the scholars of the world. And in Europe they were all pretty ignorant regarding those things. So the Cathars invited those, they invited the Moors, and as well as Catholics, to debate and absorb their knowledge. So they introduced hospitals, houses for the elderly, schools for the children. They healed people wherever they could. So much of this came from the Moors and the Saracens. The Cathars had equality and universal love for all, so it didn't matter who you were. And so all this seed and bubbled, really, even though the terrible things that went on in the Inquisition, the people being burned, the mass burnings, auto-da-fés they call them. But this all bubbled away in France, and eventually with the Enlightenment and people like Voltaire, eventually we had the French Revolution, the Republic, and the Cathar, liberty, equality and fraternity, was the Napoleonic Republican slogan, ideal, and they wanted to bring that to the rest of Europe, and so they had all the Napoleonic Wars, and each time that the Napoleon took over a country, he shut down the churches and shut down the Inquisition. So the Inquisition, the Holy Office of the Inquisition, came to an end, not because of themselves, but they were closed down by Napoleon. And he actually, his own people, when they reached Rome, the Vatican, his own troops went to the headquarters of the Inquisition and closed them down. And it is said that even his own troops were appalled by what was going on in that building. So here we have, from the ancient sands of Judea, with the Essenes, heretics, this revolutionary concept of brotherly love, total equality, and freedom, liberty. And it bubbled and seethed away, but slowly made itself until we now have various republics, and it is now this particular ideal, even though there's many people try to oppose it, it is still there, living amongst us. It's something worth thinking about. Bye for now. Talk soon.